Today on the Dr. Joe Show, I'll be exposing how the left is manufacturing a fake crisis of abortion access because of their real hidden agenda, which I'll reveal later in the show. This is straight from the left's playbook, and they've been doing it for years in all manner of policy areas. But what will shock you is just how blatant they've become, how everybody falls into line, and how useless and pathetic the opposition is in calling it out. So that's why we're here, because we're done with the BS, and I see my job as bringing you the inside scoop on what's really going on. This is the hidden agenda. The hidden agenda is, so they're not satisfied with the fact that we have abortion up to birth on demand in every state and territory in Australia. The people that love abortion, the abortion establishment, I sometimes call them the big abortion industry in Australia, they are pushing this so much that they're not going to stop until everyone can access abortion for any reason. Tick, they've achieved that. And so now that they've achieved abortion up to birth for any reason, the crisis that they are manufacturing is one of abortion access. So the way that this all starts, and it's kind of illuminating to see how policy gets made, the way it starts is there's this kind of unholy alliance between academics, journalists and politicians. So it begins with academics writing articles, finding women who have been turned away from abortions, doctors who say that the hospital system is in crisis and women aren't able to access abortion. And they gather this data, these stories. They're always anecdotal stories, manufactured or dressed up as qualitative analysis as part of like some semi-structured interview kind of methodology. So academics produce those sorts of papers, and then they share those stories with pro-abortion journalists. So I'm thinking, Melissa Davey, Tori Shepherd at The Guardian, Lucy Barber at ABC, these journalists who have a track record of pushing the pro-abortion narrative. They share those stories. The journalists then release these stories, and it's all about, these abortion deserts, the crisis in abortion access, the women who are abandoned. And they weaponize these stories and then get politicians, so pro-abortion politicians, typically from Greens, Labor, and even from the left part of the Liberal Party. So they call them moderates, paradoxically, but they're kind of more left than the Greens. So across both major parties and the Greens, there are, very ready and willing abortion proponents who then take these stories and weaponize the academic journal articles and the media exposés, and they use it to do inquiries and to introduce legislation. So that's actually what's happening now, because we have this fake manufactured abortion crisis in Australia. So I'll share with you guys this article published in the Journal of Rural and Remote Health. 5, I think, ostensibly pro-abortion scholars have written it. Erica Miller definitely jumps out as someone who's repeatedly writing about why we need more abortion and all the barriers. And, she's clearly an advocate for abortion. And the title of the article is, Imagine if we had an actual service, a qualitative exploration of abortion access challenges in Australia, in Australian rural primary care. And so what they argue is that there's a crisis in abortion access provision. So their research question is to look at what is the state of abortion access in Western Sydney. So they identify one particular region, and the methodology that they use is they write to every GP in that region. So there's 113 registered GPs in that region. They write to them with a formal letter. They do 2 follow-up emails, and they do this invitation process over a 12-month period. They then use their professional networks and snowballing and word of mouth to get interviewees in. So I just want to stop right there and just explain something really quickly. Snowballing is a particular methodology that has problems. When I was doing research on undocumented migrants in Australia, and I was trying to get into the regions and interview undocumented migrants, the ethics committee turned around and said to me, we don't want you to use snowballing technique, because snowballing will result in a self-selection bias, because you'll basically have someone who's passionate about the addressing the exploitation of migrant workers or undocumented workers. They will then talk to their mate who is also passionate about it, and it snowballs. It's a word of mouth kind of strategy of getting recruits, of bringing people into your survey. So, but that's precisely what these pro-abortion researchers did. They wrote to 113 registered GPs, and they used snowballing, professional networks, and word of mouth. So they're clearly, using their networks to purposely sample, to try and, get a sample of GPs. And it's really interesting because this study is published and there's only 16 participants. So that's a 14% response rate. So they interviewed 9 rural GPs as part of their study. A third are abortion providers. They're abortionists. They also interview people from women's health and family planning services. That's just code for abortion clinics. So they're literally interviewing abortion clinic workers. So the other thing to note is that none of the participants stated they held any conscientious objection to abortion. So when you see how the study was conducted, it's a little surprise what they find. They basically find 4 things. The first is that scarce abortion services place over-reliance on availability and goodwill of local prescribers. So that means that there's a few people that are willing to do this abortion business, that are willing to kill babies right up until birth. And because there's so few of them, it means there's a lot of pressure placed on them. The second thing they find is there's a lack of backup support, financial incentives, and training deters the providers. So what this means is they're saying people who provide abortions, the abortionists, they're just not getting enough money. And so we need to have more financial incentives to get more people doing it. They also say that training deters providers. So the fact that we actually want these abortionists to be trained so that it's safe for women, well, that's deterring providers. And one of the things in that section that just blew my mind was one of the pro-abortion participants. They actually said, one of the things we don't take into account is the cost of the state or the country looking after a child who was never wanted, and the cost to the child. Who knows that? It's actually saving the taxpayer a hell of a lot of money down the track. So this participant, given the code RCPCP005, actually says the quiet part out loud. They say, well, it costs a lot of money to raise a child, especially one that's unwanted, so we should just kill them. It's actually saving the taxpayer a hell of a lot of money. So in this argument about why we need more money for abortionists, because then we can have more abortionists, they actually quote someone from the abortion industry who says, yeah, give us more money to kill babies because it saves us money down the track. I mean, it's just disgusting. The third thing they find is interprofessional stigma, secrecy, and obstruction. So they're saying, one participant says, it's kind of whispered in corridors, like, do you know anyone who does abortions? One participant describes becoming known as the local abortion provider was quite tricky for the individual's quality of life in a small community, stating that doesn't bode well for them staying in the community thereafter. No shit. Like, it's killing babies. And in a regional community where people just generally are going to be a bit more conservative around this stuff, and probably, these are people in regional communities have typically had some experience maybe with farms, and they've seen animals be born. Like, people who have that kind of work, they're going to be really uncomfortable with the idea of killing a baby in utero and delivering them in pieces, so a dilation and evacuation abortion, or an abortion where the mother takes a pill and then induces deliberately a miscarriage, so her baby is literally delivered on the bathroom floor, or even worse, the injection of potassium chloride late in pregnancy into the baby's heart and the baby's delivered dead. It's no wonder that in regional communities, where a lot of regional communities are based in horticulture and agriculture, they're going to be very uncomfortable with this. And yeah, it's whispered in corridors because it's a disgusting thing to do to another human being. Yeah, you have to hide it. It should be underground. There should be stigma. But these pro-abortion researchers think that we need to get rid of the stigma because then we can have more abortionists and we can deal with the abortion access crisis that they've made up. The fourth thing that they find is that local abortion access requires workaround through informal law networks. So ultimately, what they say is, yes, it can be hard to find the people that can give the abortions. Yes, it's a bit expensive, but we work around it. We've got networks to be able to achieve it, and we know who the people are, and that's how we get past these pesky conscientious objectors. So, in summary, when I look at this academic article, what really strikes me is this is a biased study. It's 16 self-selected people that have a vested interest in abortion who are telling the researchers that there's a crisis in abortion access and we need more money and we need more abortionists and we need less stigma. We want to be applauded for what we do, kind of thing. It's not very groundbreaking, rigorous kind of stuff. And the other thing, that when you read something like this is, it's a normative piece of work. The authors clearly take a normative approach. They want abortion publicly funded and provided within standard healthcare and training. They have a view that abortion is healthcare and that every public hospital and every health worker should have to be involved in the abortion business. So, that's what that piece of research finds. But then what you notice is it's not just that gets published in some journal that nobody ever reads. We can see that there's this unholy alliance between these academics who produce this research and get it out through podcasts and articles, and then it gets given to journalists who then start really sensitizing this within the community and creating this, public scare campaign about women who are going to die or are in desperate situations and they can't access abortion. So The Guardian has written, just in the last few years, 37 articles about this crisis of abortion access. And that's dwarfed by ABC News, which, remember, is funded by all of us, has written or published 51 media reports on this crisis of abortion access over the last 2 to 3 years. In particular, this came to a head late last year because of Lucy Barber, a ABC journalist who clearly has a vested interest in pushing abortion if we look at her stories. Let's take a look at one of her first reports on this so-called crisis of abortion access at Orange Hospital.
Reflective but still reeling. Melissa's carefully planned surgical abortion was upended by a phone call just hours before she was due to be admitted to hospital.
He just basically said, "I'm really sorry, we can't do the procedure today." I was broke down. I was like, "What do you mean you can't? What is that? Where does that leave me?"
On the phone was her obstetrician.
I could tell he was baffled by the whole situation and he didn't understand why it hadn't happened.
Melissa's surgical termination was meant to be performed here at Queanbeyan District Hospital in southern New South Wales. Her baby had severe life-limiting malformations. This hospital had performed the same procedure under similar circumstances before. But the ABC can reveal that since Melissa's experience, the hospital suddenly stopped providing surgical terminations for fetal anomalies and medical reasons. Melissa's GP says there's been no explanation of the late cancellation, despite repeated requests to the local health district. She fears an ideological opposition to abortion could ultimately be behind it.
It feels like you're shadowboxing, that there's a pushback and you're not really sure why, and that's very frustrating.
The local health district says it supports women to access abortion services, including medical termination of pregnancy. Doctors are calling it an unspoken ban. In Orange, the local member's also seeking answers after the hospital there stopped providing abortions for non-medical reasons.
This is something that's permitted under law. It's a public health institution.
The local health district that oversees Orange has confirmed it is sending women seeking abortions for non-medical reasons to private providers or family planning.
The power lies with the Minister and with the Health Department. And it's really important that they ensure that this essential healthcare is delivered.
Melissa eventually had a medical abortion at her local hospital. Ultimately, though, she was denied the right to choose.
So let's be real, Lucy Barber. She wasn't really denied the right to choose, given that she was able to kill her baby anyway. It's not like when I go to hospital, I can demand the type of medical care I receive. That is really about what resources are available in that hospital, what types of care the hospital has a specialty in. It's not like I can say I'm going in for heart transplant surgery and I want it to look like X, not Y. She had the right to choose to kill her baby because she killed her baby. She got a medical abortion. She took pills that killed her baby. The first pill removed the nutrient supply for the baby. The second pill induced labour, and she delivered her baby dead. What she didn't have was a surgical abortion, because if we read between the lines here, there's no unspoken ban on abortion at Orange Hospital. It's just literally that there aren't staff that want to do that kind of gruesome work, and it's just so galling when you watch something like that, because she says, doctors are calling this an unspoken ban. Well, tell us the name of these doctors, Lucy. Is it one? Is it two? Is that what you kind of need to tick the box for journalism ethics these days? Because the reality is this is a small group of pro-abortion doctors around the country and academics and politicians and journos like yourself who are pushing this fake abortion crisis narrative. It is not the vast majority of Australian doctors, midwives and nurses who just don't want to do it. A surgical abortion, I'm presuming Melissa is in the first trimester, because if she was able to get a medical termination, taking the pills, that means her baby was in the first trimester. So the surgical abortion method that would have been used was most likely is something called a suction abortion. It's where the abortionist goes into the woman's uterus with this very powerful suction. It's apparently got a suction more powerful than a Dyson vacuum cleaner, and it literally obliterates the baby's body through the power of that suction. And, the abortionist then has to assemble that, check that no baby parts were left in the woman. Now, that's a really brutal kind of job. If you are the person suctioning the baby out, just ripping their arms and legs and head and all of it apart, and then it gets put in this, this tub that you then just have to look through, that's a very visible way of killing a baby. And so it's little wonder that at Orange Hospital and Queanbeyan, that's another one of Lucy Barber's targets, and many regional hospitals, in fact, there aren't doctors who want to do that kind of gruesome, brutal, serial killing kind of work as their day job. They just don't want to do it. So it's not like there's an unspoken abortion ban. It's just that these guys who are pro-abortion, these academics, these media, these politicians, they want to force people to do this stuff, but they just don't want to do it. And that's why, Melissa couldn't access a surgical abortion, but she was still able to kill her baby. I think that's probably the bottom line there. But, Lucy Barber is not just producing one story on this. She's producing a lot of stories. And so that was from late last year in about November. Just very recently, in January, she's produced another story because these journalists, they run campaigns on this sort of stuff. And that's something that, friends of mine who are journalists tell me that, news organizations run campaigns. And it's really clear when you see 37 articles in The Guardian, 51 articles in the ABC, there's clearly a campaign on abortion access, on this so-called crisis of abortion access. And as I said at the start of this video, there's a hidden agenda behind it, which I'm going to share with you. I'm going to get to that in a minute. But I'll just show you this next one, which is from the 20th of January, so just a few days ago. And she's updating us on the Orange abortion ban,
Staff at Orange Hospital had been directed to stop providing abortion services to patients who presented with no identified early pregnancy complications. That's despite abortion being a legal form of healthcare and despite the hospital previously providing the service regardless of the circumstances. Now, after we revealed or made those revelations, the ban was almost immediately overturned by the New South Wales Health Minister, Ryan Park. And now we've obtained this rather scathing letter signed off by 15 different doctors from what's called the Virtual Rural Generalist Service, which provides virtual services such as video consults to emergency departments across Western New South Wales. It has been sent to the chairman of the Western New South Wales Local Health District. That LHD oversees the Orange Health Service or the Orange Hospital. And in that letter, the doctors call the abortion ban a, quote, slap in the face to rural women. And it claims the decision to restrict abortion services is a violation of the Employee Code of Conduct. So the doctors call for any executives who were involved in the decision to restrict abortion services to be dismissed from their positions and referred to the National Health Regulator or the Public Service Commissioner. And the letter says the complaint has been lodged with the Independent Commission Against Corruption, or ICAC.
So you can see how psycho these people are. They're like buying for blood here. Lucy Barber and her network of 15 pro-abortion doctors who are wanting the names of the people at Orange Hospital who don't want to perform abortions, and therefore these surgical abortions aren't accessible. And they want the names. They've reported to ICAC. They've obviously leaked it to Lucy to get this, not just on socials, but also on ABC News and online stories as well. And they've made a story of the fact that there's 15 pro-abortion doctors who, surprise, surprise, are really annoyed that surgical abortions aren't accessible at Orange Hospital. And, the thing that they want these people to be sacked. They want them to be dismissed. They want them to be hung, drawn and quartered. They are of the view that if you are a healthcare worker and killing a baby right up in Woodbirth is healthcare, then you don't get to be a healthcare worker unless you want to do that task. So I think this gives us a clue of what their real hidden agenda is. They want a monolithic health profession. They want every hospital, they want every health worker to be in the business of abortion so that it's fully destigmatized, it's fully publicly funded, and it's fully available. And the big problem with all of this is that people don't want to do it. Okay, so the problem for them is, how do we force people to do it? And I'm just going to pull up this clip from ABC News. It begins with Erica Miller, who's one of the pro-abortion academics I was telling you about earlier. Surprise, surprise, she's a typical voice that the ABC would interview for a story like this. Lucy Barber's never even contacted me or anyone, as far as I can tell, from an critical perspective of abortion. When you look at The Guardian and the ABC, it's a lineup of pro-abortion voices that they will pick. There's no attempt to balance.
All of that means the time that someone has to decide and obtain an abortion is limited. And there are also limits on where you can get one. In South Australia, the Northern Territory and most recently Tasmania, you can obtain a surgical abortion in a public hospital and it's free, covered by Medicare. But in the rest of the country, terminations are performed in private clinics.
Now there's two obstacles when it comes to this privatisation of abortion. The first is cost. And so there's significant out-of-pocket costs for abortion. And if you're looking at a surgical abortion at a private clinic, you're looking at upward of about $650 in upfront costs. And so this also is a bit dependent on where you live. And so if you live in Brisbane, Sydney or Melbourne, for example, that's what you'd pay. But if you live in Perth, you'd need to pay $850 for the same procedure, and the same procedure that's provided for free to people in South Australia and Northern Territory. The second thing about privatisation is these private clinics need to remain financially viable. And in order to do so, what's happened is they've really concentrated in large cities where there's more demand. And so there's very little, if any, provision of surgical abortion in regional and rural Australia.
Dr. Erica Miller has studied barriers to accessing abortion services in Australia and says since private clinics in Townsville and Rockhampton closed last year, people in those parts of Queensland have to travel up to 2,000 kilometres for an abortion, creating additional cost and stress. An alternative for them and many others is a medical rather than surgical abortion, which involves drugs that are on the pharmaceutical benefit scheme and can be prescribed by any general practitioner who registers to do so. The trouble is, most GPs are not registered.
Medical abortion, in theory, could be provided by a GP for little to no cost. And so you could go to your GP, they could bulk bill the consultation, and then you can get the drugs required for a medical abortion very cheaply. And so because it's on the PBS, and so it costs about $16 or so. And in order for that to happen, and some GPs do provide this service, the GP needs to sort of be a real advocate of abortion provision, really, because they need to bill through Medicare that doesn't really fully subsidise the time and labour involved, because there's no Medicare item specifically for medical abortion. The doctor also needs to have a relationship with a sonographer who'd also bulk bill an ultrasound, because there is a requirement in Australia that you need an ultrasound prior to a medical abortion. And interestingly, the World Health Organization have just published guidelines, and they say that this ultrasound prior to medical abortion is completely unnecessary.
As a result of the regulatory and financial disincentives and the stigma still surrounding the issue, Dr. Miller says only 10% of GPs are registered to prescribe abortion drugs, and that falls to 1% of doctors in rural and regional Australia.
Only 10% of GPs want to prescribe these abortion drugs. So there's approximately 39,000 GPs in Australia, and we've got, less than 4,000 who are comfortable with giving these drugs to a woman and then killing her baby that way. So she takes the drugs and her baby gets killed at home. She delivers the baby dead onto the bathroom floor, into the toilet, and she sees her baby. So the fact that it's less than 10% that want to do this, the ABC and Dr. Erica Miller put this down to stigma, and red tape. But again, I think it's because doctors don't want to do this. They just feel really uncomfortable with it. They feel uncomfortable with giving a woman a pill and forcing her to do that at home. They feel even more uncomfortable with the surgical options, where they themselves have to do the killing by breaking the body of the baby apart, with metal forceps, if it's a dilation and evacuation, or the suction abortion where they're suctioning the baby out, or the injection of potassium chloride. Doctors just don't want to do that. That's even more gruesome. And, I think what we are really now being confronted with is the fact that the hidden agenda that, Dr. Erica Miller has and the ABC has and the Greens have, it's to force everybody to be okay with abortion. They've tried, they've tried with their propaganda. They've tried to legalize abortion up to birth. They've tried to make us, think that this is essential to women's equality, that women cannot be equal. They don't have rights unless they can kill their babies right up until birth. And that's not really succeeding, is it? Less than 10% of GPs want to do this. I think the data on Australians' attitudes to abortion, Ipsos does a poll every year. It's like 31% of Australians are comfortable or okay with abortion up to 20 weeks. So imagine if it was up to birth, the level of comfort, or should we say discomfort, would be just extraordinarily high amongst the Australian population, which is why they just sort of cover it up and pretend that it's not happening up to birth. But it's also why that these people who care about abortion, the hidden agenda is that they want to force people and hospitals to perform abortions. And so, this is where we go full circle. So the Greens led an inquiry into universal access to reproductive health care in Australia. That was an inquiry 18 months ago, led by the Greens in the federal Senate. And of course, what did they find? What did the most pro-abortion political party in the country find? They found that abortion in Australia is a postcode lottery. And of course, we then see, journalists like Tori Shepherd and Melissa Davey producing articles about how abortion in Australia is a postcode lottery and there are these deserts, so it all feeds. It's like this vicious cycle where they just sort of create this false narrative and then they, perpetuate it and get it out there through multiple channels. And then now what we see are bills. We see that the Greens are announcing that they're going to do something. This is Amanda Cohen in New South Wales. She's announced that at the start of the year, 2025, she's going to be introducing something about abortion access to deal with this abortion access crisis that her mates at the ABC and The Guardian have been manufacturing. And the end result is the only way they deal with this abortion access crisis is to take more of our money to pay for these abortions, to tie the public funding of hospitals to the provision of abortion. So this is something Labor took to the polls in 2019 when Bill Shorten was the leader of the Federal Labor Party. There was an election with ScoMo, and the policy that Labor took to the polls was that they were going to force public hospitals. So some of these public hospitals are faith-based. They're Catholic or Christian hospitals, with a lot of health workers who come from those perspectives, who are against abortion, who believe that it kills a human being, which it does, and so therefore they don't want to do it. Labor took that to the polls. It was vastly unpopular. In fact, in a review by Jay Weatherall about why Labor lost that election, because they were expected to win it, this was seen as one of the key reasons why they lost, because that was such a radical policy to force people of faith and faith-based institutions to kill human beings via abortion and to tie funding to that. That was seen as so extreme that the Australian people, turned on Labor. It was one of the reasons. And so, the Greens are now pushing that in a bill in the New South Wales Parliament. And, I think this is the hidden agenda. The hidden agenda is these people are deeply anti-Christian, anti-Catholic, because they have their own religion, and their own religion is abortion. And so if you're not okay with their religion of abortion free, available on every street corner and performed by every health worker because it's essential healthcare, then you are, you're breaking one of the key tenets of their religion. And so that's their hidden agenda, that they want to force people to do this stuff who don't want to do it, and they want to override the conscience of very good, well-meaning, decent health workers in this country. That was a mammoth one, guys. Took a lot of research to pull it together. If you thought it was worthwhile, please share it with your friends and family, because we need to spread the word that this is happening. Please hit the subscribe button, and please do tune in next time for the Dr. Joe Show.